You know, a lot of these designs that we're talking about, and through the history of the Sonerai through the SubSonex, we have to keep in mind that a lot of people have been involved, not just myself, but many people along the way that have volunteered and or been directly involved in the designs. So this is not a one-man show, and never was, but it does show a progression and a philosophy of what we're about and what the EA is about. I believe it's really to the heart of that. We all started out a long time ago in 1969 after I'd rebuilt a couple of antique airplanes. That's Betty's sitting there on the right side with a little airplane. A friend of mine came into my garage. I was working actually on a Mustang 2. I had Mustang 1, I'm sorry, and it was one of those projects like all EA members do back in the day, is we'd get a set of plans and then we'd start modifying it to our own requirements. And actually, the Mustang 1 I wanted to stretch to a tandem airplane and put a bigger motor on it. But I was teaching high school at the time, and soon realized that wasn't in my financial ability to complete. So this friend of mine came in and we looked at Popular Mechanics, and there was an airplane you could build for $400. It's called a Jeanie's Teenie, and we quickly sent off for plans. I don't know, they were $10 or $15. So when we got the plans, I always say, you know, they were worth maybe a couple of bucks. There wasn't anything that really worked very well on it, but I was a school teacher. I had time off during the summer, and what you see in these pictures is the kind of progress I made just in about 2 months' work to build an airframe. It was a tricycle gear. I'm used to tail draggers, and the one with Betty in it pictured was the first configuration. But one day I stood back and looked at it and go, this isn't going to work, and got out my drill and drilled off the whole tail cone of the airplane, and decided to make it a tail dragger and redesign the tail and to my liking. So it was a little different. This picture shows a typical Jeanie's Teenie on the top view, and the bottom view is what I ended up with. And in 1970, we showed up with it here at Oshkosh. You can see the little Teenie in the background. This was really a fun little airplane. I did my own engine conversion on it. It had a spring steel landing gear. Those gear legs were literally springs off of a truck that were reshaped, kind of taken after Wittman and his idea of a spring gear, and it was an inexpensive way of making a landing gear for this airplane. We learned a lot about VWs in this configuration and the type of construction, which really was the genesis for the way that we build airplanes even today. It was a fun little airplane, and in the preceding years, and actually at the fly-in in 1966, I first met Steve Wittman, and he was talking about Formula V racing, and he was going to build a racer. So at 1970, he showed up with a partly built VW racer, and I was very inspired by it. Actually, I went home after the fly-in literally on the dining room, breakfast room table, with a napkin, started drawing out an airplane. And Steve was a great influence. This is a picture of a long time ago of him and I together with the airport manager at the time, celebrating his birthday. But he was a great influence. We became very good friends when I moved up to Oshkosh eventually in 1981. And really, I adopted a lot of his philosophy about simplicity of design, a lot of the things about how you make an airplane handle, and it really stayed with us. So in the period of that year, and we call this era from 1971 to 1986, when we started Monnett Experimental Aircraft, really the first airplane that we came up with was for Formula V racing. And it only took me 9 months to build this airplane from scratch. It's a classic Formula type airplane, although it fit Formula V rules. It's a tubular fuselage with an all-metal folding wing, full span ailerons. You see this in this picture. This is by by the way, this is the first cover photo that Jack Cox ever did, and if everybody knows the heritage of Jack Cox and sport aviation, you'll appreciate this photo. But it shows that we have a spring steel gear, a fiberglass cowling, a bubble canopy. Of course, very simple, straightforward airplane. It had about 75 square feet of wing, which was exactly what we had to have for Formula V racing. So the significance of this airplane was that in 1971, when both Steve and I showed up with our Formula V racers, we had now taken VW-powered airplanes from the category of, just little sport airplanes that had maybe 110, 115 mile an hour speeds, up to airplanes that were capable of 170 miles an hour. So it was a significant increase in the amount of performance that you could get out of an airplane. These were 1600 cc engines, and there's a lot more significant things about this airplane. It actually flew with over 100 different propellers, many different cowlings, different wing tips, different tail configurations. The most significant thing, I think, is that it was the first airplane to fly with a dural aluminum landing gear. Now, everybody knows Steve Wittman's legendary gear, his spring steel gear used on Cessnas, and his tapered gear used on and duplicated on many other designs. Vans RV uses a version of a gear that looks very similar to what Steve had designed. But we were the first ones to put a dural gear on with a partner of mine who came up with the idea, and we flew this airplane. Now, it's just interesting that Steve's last airplane had a gear on it that we built, and it was aluminum. So we're always proud of that, and we're proud that the Sonerai hung in the EAA lobby here in 1982 when the museum opened, and is part of the EAA collection. This airplane was really a genesis of another line of airplanes, and we continued looking at Formula V and how we could maybe train pilots to fly racers. Well, it wasn't very long that after that in 1974 that we came up with the Sonerai II. But probably a sidebar story to this airplane, if I can tell it quickly, is that in 1973 or so, 72, a little airplane called a BD-5 came out, and there's a local concern here in Oshkosh and Fond du Lac called Kiefer Aero Marine, and they were going to build a two-cycle engine for the BD-5, which never came to be because Mr. Kiefer and Mr. Beatty went their separate ways. But in the interim, we were let known by Jack Cox that there was a little two-cycle engine going to be available that was about 70 horsepower, and it would be one that would turn a propeller in a normal configuration. And we designed a little airplane called the Brand X. It was based on a Sonerai, I'm sorry, and it was expanded in wing area. We thought we could make it work, but that engine never came to be. But we had this nice little design, and we said, you know what? We can really make a VW work in this airplane. So this airplane was powered by a 1700 cc VW, not much bigger than our standard racing engine. It just had a little bit bigger cylinders, and we turned it up a little higher to get a little more horsepower out of it. But we could carry two people, and the whole concept of this airplane was just like a Piper Cub. It was a rear seat solo. Actually, the rear cockpit of this airplane was in the same position as it was on a racer. So what we did is stretch the front end a little bit. We eliminated a motor mount so we could get the engine onto the airframe, and therefore give us a little leg room for a front cockpit. So just like a Piper Cub, the front cockpit was very cramped, but the rear cockpit was just the same as the Sonerai I. And that worked. This airplane weighed under 500 pounds empty. It was a 9G airplane, or 6G aerobatic airplane, and was very successful. The big point about it was, just like the Sonerai I, and all of our airplanes since these designs always had to have either removable or folding wings. And here we are set to go to Sun and Fun Flying in 1976. This was taken in Elgin, Illinois, and we towed them down there in this configuration. So it gave us a lot of utility to be able to get the airplanes around to where we needed to and still have a lot of fun with them, take them to racers, etc. Well, there's a genesis of airplanes, and one of my old college professors was actually the advisor to our flying club, and he moved up to Stout University from DeKalb, Illinois. He started the University Stout System Industrial Arts program. They had a program to teach industrial arts teachers, and they did their own startup of Project School Flight. The airplane in the middle here, 22 Mike X-ray, was actually built totally in 2 weeks. Now we know what the 1 week wonder was here at Oshkosh, but this was an airplane that had a welded fuselage. It was basically a scratch-built airplane and put together by industrial arts teachers, a small group, very dedicated, and worked in 2 weeks and produced this airplane. It was amazing. They ended up producing over a half a dozen Sonerais like this over subsequent years. It was pretty cool. Well, we had a mid-wing configuration that was, you know, difficult for older guys to get into like I am now. But in the day, you know, it was easy for us to get into a mid-wing airplane just by throwing our legs up, and we could, you know, a little more agile. But here's the airplane that ultimately developed. It was a low wing, and the funny thing about this is that the Sonerai I was originally designed as a low wing airplane. But we heard that Steve had gotten his airplane. We had some friends up here in Oshkosh, and they told us, yeah, Steve's got his airplane, and it's really going fast, and it's a mid-wing. And I decided in mid-course with the Sonerai I to move the wing from a low wing up to a mid-wing. I always liked the Spitfire look of airplanes. I tried to emulate that look a little bit with our airplanes. And so we ended up building a mid-wing airplane, and then eventually came full circle with the Sonerai II low winger, and it actually was a very nice flying airplane. We lost very little performance with it. These were powered by 1700 cc engines up to about 2180s that we use commonly now, with little 2.2 liter engines. So here's the difference. 2 Mike X-ray, a mid-wing airplane, and 12 Mike X-ray, a low-wing airplane. Both fly pretty much alike. And but 12 Mike X-ray had a little more history. We'll look at it here. It became the prototype to sprout a nose wheel, because everybody wants to have a nose. Not everybody, but you know, there are a large number of pilots that want nose wheels. So it grew a nose wheel, and it was very successful in that regard. We have now an airplane that, as we developed VW engines, if you listen to my VW seminar before webinar, the bigger the engines, now we had power loading, we could do a little more with the airframe. So we base our philosophy on not only the wing loading of the airplane, but the power loading of the airplane. So as we got bigger engines, we could increase gross weight. This is a stretch Sonerai, and actually it's got 6 inches more cockpit area in the front cockpit, and it's got a little longer tail to compensate for that. So this allowed us to get a little bit bigger people and a little higher gross weight and still have very good performance. Remember that these airplanes cruise at about 155 miles an hour, so they're pretty capable. There's a little shot I threw in about one of our booths. This is 1976, if everybody remembers. At that time, that was when the Very Easy came out with Burt Rutan, and that little engine on the stand back there, we almost sold to Burt to set a record in his Very Easy, the very first time he showed it here at Oshkosh. And actually, we ended up taking the engine out of my racer that was down in Elgin, the Sonerai I, and installing it in the Very Easy, and in a few days later, it set a world's record for 17 hours of continuous flight. It was a big deal, and Burt was always very grateful to us, and we were happy to participate in that record. The other thing that's shown here is this fuselage that's all fiberglass. It is a complete shell that we developed we found that after many, many tries that it was just too darn heavy. So that airplane was converted to just a standard fabric airplane. Here it is, and it eventually was the Sonerai II low wing prototype. So that's how it works. Here's a group picture of just some Sonerais, but the red one on the left was another one of those Stout airplanes that again built and painted and finished and ready to fly in 2 weeks, which is pretty remarkable at the time. We've always looked at niches, and I've always been interested in going down a different road. With the racers and with the VW low-powered, high-performance airplanes, you know, nothing can get higher performance and more bang for the buck than a glider. And I really got interested in sailplanes. Now, I didn't have a sailplane rating, but I had a kid working for me. I'm going to talk about him a little bit later, but he came into the shop and was interested in building the Sonerai II, and I knew he was really bright and very capable kid. His name was Pete Buck, and we were just starting this. I was just starting this project. I said, you know, I want to build a glider. I didn't know much about how gliders controlled. I knew that, you know, how the aerodynamics of them. So this airplane was going to be a lightweight airplane, and obviously you can see it's only weighed 225 pounds. It had a 28-to-1 glide ratio, and was a 6G airplane. It had a fully bonded aluminum wing, 90-degree flaps, aluminum tail boom. It had a steel tube structure for the main shell, and which we could actually remove out of the shell. Full flying tails, and if you can see this picture, if you look at it real carefully, you'll see that one tail surface is about 2 inches ahead of the other, and that was for structural purposes to get all the controls into the airplane. The airplane didn't know any difference. You know, if people look at V tails and Y tails, and they just don't understand that the tail doesn't really matter where it's oriented as long as it does the job. And this one very much did. We were lucky that in flying this airplane, when I originally flew it, I had about 2 inches of stick throw from stop to stop, and with a full flying tail, it was quite sensitive, to say the least. And eventually ended up with over 6 inches of total stick throw. So that calmed it down, and it became a very popular airplane. Actually, this is a cockpit of the Monerai. It's a supine sitting. Is very, very comfortable for long flights. We had a side stick, and we had 90-degree flaps to control our glide path. So the airplane was very, very capable, and it garnered the attention of a guy that was a Sonerai owner that wrote me a letter, and he had some problems with the Sonerai. It was, of course, a Sonerai that had been modified. It wasn't a VW powered Sonerai. Now it was a A65 Continental powered thing, which is like, you know, putting an anchor on the front of the airplane compared to a VW. And I asked some questions, but at the end of this little note, he said, by the way, I've flown just about every high-performance sailplane in the world, and I've really been following your development of the Monerai, blah, blah, blah. And he signed it George Moffet. Well, George Moffet, I recognized immediately when I got this letter. You know, we didn't have email then. We just had letters. And at the end of this letter, it says, like, George Moffet's two-time world soaring champion. So George volunteered to help, so we met him at a soaring convention in D.C., and he was really interested in seeing what we could do with this little airplane. Of course, it wasn't like an unlimited airplane. It was only an 11-meter sailplane, but again, light. And here's one of my favorite places, right at Black Forest Glider Port in Colorado, and that's Pikes Peak in the background, and we did a lot of wave flying with the airplanes. It's the first two prototype airplanes, the original and the other. And this is George and I flying out of Hinckley, Illinois. At the time, the state record for altitude was 11,000 feet, and we didn't have any barographs, but we were around at 11,000 feet with these airplanes for 3.5 hours on a Memorial Day weekend, and I followed him around and learned a lot from him, and He's always been a great supporter of the airplane, and that really gave us a lot of credence with the airplane. And to show you this, these are all pods. This is we produced more Monerai sailplanes than Schweitzer did 126 sailplanes, and everybody knows that's a very popular airplane. And this airplane far out exceeded its performance, and so we're very proud of this whole genre. And the cool thing about it was that as we were developing it, it had this little hole in the top of the shell that was like a blowhole on a whale. And it was literally, the idea was to have this as a self-launching sailplane to be able to stick a motor on it and get it off the ground, because we couldn't afford tow rates and all that stuff. So this airplane was actually configured with 3 popular engines. In this picture, it's got the KFM 107, which eventually was the original motor for our later Moni, but we refitted it for the Monerai, and we were able to get a lot of performance out of it. We also use a Koenig engine and a Zenoa engine, which is still popular in some of the ultralights and powered parachutes and things like that. So this is the era when we were developing this airplane in 1977 or 76, when ultralights were first coming in, and we had the same issues with finding engines of about the same size to get the performance. So we made a lot of strides, and I think the ultralight community really benefited from some of the stuff that we were doing with the Monerai sailplane. Oh, and by the way, the kids were always supportive, and that's our future CEO. That's Jeremy. That's with his mouth open, of course. When Pete and I were looking at the Formula V racing and what it was doing, we had certain design parameters that we had to adhere to meet the formula. We had 75 square feet of wing. We had a certain visibility requirement. We had, the airplane had to be so many G's. It had to have it had to have big tires, 505 tires, which I consider large, and it was 1600 cc's. So we said, what if we developed a hot rod? What if we just didn't have a formula? What would it look like? What could we do? We could build an engine of 2180 cc's, a 2.2 liter engine. We could run it at really high compression. We could put aluminum gear on it. We can have make it look like a sailplane. Use a lifting body. This airplane was originally designed to have a 2-cycle engine with skin radiators on it, but we just couldn't get a gearbox. If we had a Rotax engine today, we could have done this airplane very, very nicely. But we fitted a VW to it. This airplane weighs 410 pounds empty. It's only got like 55 square feet of wing with full span ailerons. It didn't have any dihedral in it when we first flew it. A big pitch propeller. It is unquestionably a very interesting. It was a very interesting airplane. When Pete and I used to go out to the airport to fly this thing, we didn't say a word to each other because we're so nervous about flying it. Because I could literally sit in this cockpit and see like both sides of the county, and that was about it. And it was a unique thing. So it's a blend of a sailplane technology we had. It uses the same spar that the Monerai did as our unispar that we see today in the Sonex designs. Very efficient extruded section. It had a bonded wing, so there were no rivets in it. It was very, very smooth. Everybody thought it was fiberglass, but it was metal. And again, this airplane, I think, was only 410 pounds with an engine that was producing probably 125 horsepower or more. So it was pretty sprightly airplane. It was just a delight to fly in the air. It was a bear on the ground and landing. We wrecked it 6 times between myself and Chuck Andrews. And when Chuck Andrews in 1982 flew it in the Oshkosh 500, and then the day after the Oshkosh 500 flew it to these records, and the 500-kilometer record still stands today. This is by far the world's fastest ultralight airplane because it set a record in C1AO class, which is the lightest class that you can set a record in. It was 4 ultralights. The record it beat was 62 miles an hour. So we made a significant jump in here, and keeping in mind that this class was only 300 kilos. That's 666 pounds about. That means the airplane, the fuel, and the pilot to go 500 kilometers. Actually, Chuck Andrews was dead stick on after the final pylon landed at Sheboygan Airport. It's a triangular course that went from Sheboygan to Oshkosh to Fond du Lac and back to Sheboygan. But in the days before GPS, etc., dead reckoning navigation, running this thing at conservative fuel flows. The day before, he'd run it 500 miles at full throttle. With an engine that had 11-to-1 compression ratio, no oil cooler or anything. So it is a pretty interesting airplane, and today it resides in the terminal at Oshkosh Airport. So if you want to take a look at it, you can see it. But it is by far the genesis and the granddaddy for all of the subsequent designs that we've been involved with, and the way it's built. And if you look at it, you can see it's just a box. It's got a round cowling and a canopy that make it look round. It also has a Y tail, meaning it's a V tail, but it has a sub rudder and aluminum dural gear, of course, and it set the tone for a lot of airplanes. When I talked about engines developing for the Monerai sailplane, we wanted that little KFM engine, but the KFM was an Italian company that said, we're going to build an engine for you. We went through many design iterations with them. They said, we'll build an engine, but we don't want it on a Monerai because everybody knows the Monerai. We want you to build a new airplane. And so it was an interesting challenge. We were going to have a 25 horsepower opposed 2-cycle engine, and that would be great in a glider. But we thought, well, it would be neat to have a little motor glider. Let's base it on the kind of construction techniques that we used in the Monex. We'll bond a wing. It'll be a reasonable airplane. It should have, as a motor glider. It'll have the performance of about a 126 sailplane, about 21, 22, 23 to 1 glide ratio, single wheel gear, little tiny prop. It's only 33 inches in diameter with 25 horsepower. So this airplane was designed to be just an absolute fun airplane. And actually in 1981, we flew it here at Oshkosh during the fly-in. It was with serial number one engine and serial number one airplane, and we built this and designed this airplane over a course of about 6 months. As with all things, and I may sound a little sarcastic there, but we always have guys that want to put a nose wheel on an airplane. Now, single wheel gear is awesome. That we have on gliders, and like on the Moni, that we could land in crosswinds very easily. We didn't have to worry about switching ends with the airplane. But we have to have tri-gear now. We've got 3 wheels hanging out with gear hanging out, and of course now it's not a motor glider anymore. It's just a little light sport airplane flying around with 25 horsepower. But still was successful. A lot of these airplanes are still flying today. And by far the Moni is one of my absolute favorite airplanes. It was always fun to buzz boats with the engine with the prop shut down here out on the lakes, and then pull up and disappear and restart the engine. It was kind of fun, and we do it. So as with all things, you can't leave well enough alone. This is an airplane that went in a really nice trailer, 27-foot wingspan. And one day, of course, I just said, well, what if we cut the wing in half, down practically in half? This airplane with the little wings, had a 15.5-foot wingspan. It is responsible for me probably being closest to getting killed as any airplane I've ever flown. When we were on a photo mission with this picture, was taken just before I had one of the ignition modules go out on this engine. It's 25 horsepower. It had 2 cylinders, 2 ignition systems, 1 for each cylinder. One went out, so now I'm running on 11 horsepower, and I'm going, oh boy. I called the tower. We were only about 500 feet off the ground here. We were doing this photo mission. west of Oshkosh, and I had to make a 180-degree turn. And as I did, I looked at the airspeed indicator. I was still maintaining 90 miles an hour. I flew it back to the airport, made a nice landing on 27. And as I touched down and stopped, I heard the screeching of brakes. And actually, it was one of the big Oshkosh fire trucks that ended up about 6 inches from my tail. And the drivers apologized, saying, "Oh, we didn't know you were going to stop so soon," and practically, made a flattened can out of me. But nevertheless, it was an interesting thing. So now we come to a period where we've done stuff with the Monnett experimental aircraft, and in 1986 it was sold to a foreign investor that went out of business. So for a while we were out of aviation, building Piper Cubs and all kinds of things to stay in aviation, and we got back in 1997 we had a really unique opportunity. I can't say enough about this individual. Pete Buck, again, worked for me when he was 16 years old. He moved to California in 1981 through a mutual friend of ours. He started working at the Skunk Works and worked on the floor of the not only Have Blue but the 117 project. Got his night school, got his master's degree. He is now a fellow at Lockheed Martin, among the elite engineers, and like I said, I can't be more proud of him. But Pete did have a Sonerai, and he developed diabetes, so he was flying gliders a lot. And when we had this opportunity, and I'm going to explain it a little bit, we had an opportunity in 1997 through a businessman in Italy that contacted us because I had sold a couple of Vagabonds. I rebuilt about 4 Piper Vagabonds that met the European microlight category, or ultralight category as we would call it. We had if you had an airplane that's 1,100 pounds gross, it stalled at 40 miles an hour, you could fly it without a pilot's license. And you could fly it on during the week, you could fly it to a maximum altitude of 500 feet. You could fly it on the weekends. I think on Sunday, you could fly it to 1,000 feet, which is a big treat. You can imagine us flying Vagabonds and Cubs around at that altitude. But they said, they found out that I was involved with the Sonerai, and they asked us to send some Sonerais over. We packed a bunch of containers full of Sonerais. We got them from all over the country, and sent them over there to fit this multralight, this microlight category. And the Sonerai didn't have flaps, so it wasn't, it really didn't make the 40 miles an hour. It could stall. A really clean light one would stall about 44 miles an hour. But they did some things, and eventually they said, John, we'd really like you to design a side-by-side airplane. Well, I thought about it, and I said, well, maybe we could look at it. And I called Pete. He was out in California, and I'm here in Oshkosh. And I said, Pete, I got an opportunity. I've been looking at a side-by-side Sonerai design for a while. And he says, John, I've been since I had the diabetes and everything. I've been building a scaled-up, kind of designing a scaled-up Moni, so I could take my daughter flying in a sailplane or a motor glider. And we got together. We got to start with a clean sheet of paper, and let's get together. And we came up with this, and a lot of it, most of it's really Pete's genius. But our mission was to build an airplane that could be manufactured. And by the way, in Italy, if you did meet the microlight category, you could buy the airplane ready to fly. So we wanted an airplane that could be built by unskilled labor. Fully detailed plans, of course, for manufacturing it. That was not only our mission, but our contract. And we successfully did that. In a 9-month period, we built these airplanes, and this is the first prototype. This is the Sonex first airplane that flew with a 2200 cc Jabiru engine, because we could we could do it, but then we had an engine that we could work with. We knew fully well that this was designed around 80 horsepower. It was going to be powered by a VW engine eventually. But that's another story, and if you listen to my webinar, you'll know what that story is. But anyways, this airplane was built and constructed, and we knew that it was going to be not only fulfill the contract that we had for these prototypes, but also that it was going to be a nice sport airplane on the LSA area. And as it turned out, we call it the thoroughbred sport pilot airplane because being designed for this microlight category, that was the genesis for what we know as sport pilot now. Although the gross weights have gone up, but this airplane was designed for that 1,100-pound gross to carry 2 people, 80 horsepower, and stall at 40 miles an hour and still go fast. And we accomplished that mission. This is actually the airplane that I took to Italy. This is the second prototype, a tri-gear with a 2200 Jabiru engine in it. I actually flew this thing out of an 800-foot strip. I know people say, oh, it's crazy. Well, it had clear approaches, but it was an ultralight strip, and it was relatively unimproved. I flew it not only to the south, but also to the east of Rome, and very, very interesting things developing it and flying it on benzene, not gasoline. It was pretty crazy. But this airplane proved itself, and we knew that the Sonex, this version was going to meet what we required as a sport airplane. As we were able to redevelop our ideas about VW airplanes, this is the third prototype that was flying with an 80 horsepower VW conversion, our aero conversion engine, and we have continued developing it through the years. This is SX1. This is the very first Sonex prototype that not only flew with a 2200 Jabiru, but also, as we knew when we were designing it, that we could incorporate the new 6-cylinder Jabiru. That we were known that we would have that, and we actually had serial number 4 of that engine and built it into this airplane. So it had a lot of capability. Here you see it on amphibious floats, which was spectacular. I always felt like I was flying a bomber with this thing. I was going to sat up so high compared to our normal aircraft, but a very successful airplane. Insurance is high for them. There wasn't that much interest, but this airplane had a lot of capability and still would cruise at 135 miles an hour with the float. So I was very proud of the performance it got. As I said, Pete had gotten diabetes and he worked on a bigger airplane, and this is Pete's airplane. I mean, this was built for Pete. Though we conspired on the airplane, as it were. The Xenos is just a big Moni. It's a 4/3 Moni. Basically, it uses all of the cockpit that is in the Sonex. It has a longer tail moment, a bigger tail. It has a Wittman airfoil in it. Here you can see with the prop stop. The funny thing about this airplane, I always love, it's such a sweetheart to fly. It practically flies itself, but it is the biggest airplane in our fleet, and it has by far the smallest little toothpick of a propeller. It's a propeller that's Sensenik designed for us to have minimum drag when it's shut down like this in the soaring configuration, and it really works well. This airplane will outperform a lot of the Schweitzer sailplanes, and it's got a power lineage sufficient with a Aero V engine in it. It weighs less than a Grobe 109 at gross. The Xenos weighs less than a 109 does empty, so it has the same engine. So its climb is spectacular. This is the airplane that we really wanted to build when we designed the Sonex. It's called the YX for obvious reasons. Everybody asks us always, how do we get these goofy names? Well, Xenos is Sonex backwards. YX is, well, because it's got a Y tail, and we had to make that. And you can see it has a sub rudder. We put side exhausts on it just for fun. It's kind of appeal to the Harley crowd. But this is basically a Sonex with a Y tail. We knew that when we first designed the Sonex, that if we put a Y tail on it like we wanted to, we'd have a lot of inertia in the marketplace. Everybody asks this dumb question, does it fly like a Bonanza? And I always say, well, of course it flies like a Bonanza. It uses Bernoulli's principle. But what they were referring to as the Bonanza's tail is kind of an old design, and it hunts a lot. It doesn't have the proper angle on the tail as far as I'm concerned, and doesn't give us the stability. Actually, if you're flying a YX or if you're flying a Sonex, you have to have a rear view mirror to tell which airplane you're flying because they fly exactly alike. Is there a difference in performance? Probably not very much. Hard to measure, but this one gets a lot more attention when you're at the gas pump. I had the real pleasure of one of the milestones of my life. I flew these 3 brand new airplanes. One was the YX prototype, the Xenos prototype with a Jabiru 3300 in it, and the Xenos with our AeroV engine in it. I flew all these airplanes. Our first flights within an hour and a half, and that was a fun day, and we were all very happy. So the crew. Pete next to me, and Jeremy, Monnett, my son, and George Rotter and Old Time M.E.A are here that helped build all these airplanes as a volunteer. It was very cool. So there's the story of Sonex together, 2 configurations, of course, the tail dragger and of course the nose wheel airplanes, which are our sport trainers. The ST does that, and we'll talk about the configurations. So Sonex has developed, it's been developed into many different little nuances and configuration. The tri-gear, we have SX1, which is the Jabiru powered airplane, and we have a sport trainer version, which means that the controls are in the middle, so it's more like a conventional trainer, and we have 2 of those that we use for our T-flight programs every day that we can be flying. And the Sport Acro version is nothing more than a standard Sonex or YX with long ailerons, just to get a little more roll rate. The roll rate is very sprightly, but when we're in competition aerobatics, we want all the roll rate we can get, and that's what they do. And our 3 engine conversions from left to right is our AeroV conversion with all the red parts on it, Jabiru 6 down below, and our 2200 Jabiru engine, that all Australian engines that are very nice power plants for our airplanes. We have another airplane called the Onex, and I'm proud to say that Jeremy is my son, the engineer, was lead designer on this airplane. We had, of course, this is always a team effort, and coming up with things like folding wings, etc. And this is a single-place airplane. It's a very stout airplane. It's aerobatic, but the nice thing about it is that in a few seconds you can fold the wings and put in on a trailer or put it in a garage, and it's a very, very successful design for Sonex, period. We know all the stuff, we've had the pleasure of designing and building over the years, and with consolidated, as we've gotten more sophisticated, I've gotten older, I've gotten a lot of help, and we've got a fully developed program as far as how we design and build these airplanes. And one of the things that we're very proud of is all of our testing that we do. Our testing at Part 23 and FARs, and as if they were certified airplane. This is a test. This is a Onex wing, and you can see that it's just crazy when we do these testings. It's all done in stages, of course, bring it up through all of the G loading that we need. But it's a fun day, and we have a big sandbox for the kids later after we're done with this. This is a tail test. Underneath this pile of sand is a horizontal stabilizer. You can see it on the right. You can see with all this weight on it, which is over 500 pounds per side, it's deflected about an inch. This is not even. We haven't destroyed a tail yet, and we've tried. Believe me, this is well over our 6 Gs plus 50% plus all of our added safety factors. So it's a pretty interesting process. So always in our R&D, there's always something going on that's kind of fun. This is a real fun one. It looks like a standard airplane. This is our all-electric, our E-Flight project that we introduced. It's challenged a number of years ago. We're a believer in electric flight, and we wanted to build an airplane that actually demonstrated it was an airplane. It wasn't a motor glider. It wasn't an ultralight. It was a full-fledged airframe. This airplane has a 55 kilowatt motor in it. It has a battery pack that delivers 330 volts at 200 amps, which is a huge amount of power. We're very proud of our team. Not only Pete is very, very involved in this project. A fellow named Andrew Pierce is also our team member and our electronic genius that puts all this stuff together. We're very proud through this whole project, this ongoing, is that we're developing motors and controller systems that eventually, as battery technology catches up, will give us the ability to have really useful flight out of electric airplanes. Well, this is my favorite project, and I know we're getting near the end of the deal, but always, and Pete has got the same, in the back of him, he's got the same little screw loose that I do in the back of his brain. We got to look at it in niches. I've been looking at the BD-5 jet since 1972, and saying, boy, someday I'd like to have something like that. But knowing that back in 1972, 74, the engine for the BD-5 was $150,000 at the time. That was like an incredible amount of money. And that someday it would be cool if we ever were in a position to build things. Well, we look at the Moni and Mini Moni. You can see the heritage here in this airplane, and we thought, well, this is cool. We'll put a single wheel gear on it and a little jet engine. This was basically a large model airplane engine. It didn't really work out because we'd never got a controller for it, but the concept was there, and we knew it would be ready. That we could have a little personal jet, and we introduced it at our open house a number of years ago, and it immediately got some attention. And as we got into the test program, I knew that it wasn't going to work as a single wheel gear, so it sprouted a nose wheel and standard gear. But this is again a very rough proof of concept prototype. The nice thing about our construction is that it's very adaptable. We can make changes pretty readily, and putting a main gear and a nose wheel on the airplane wasn't a big deal, but it got it to the point where it could fly. And fortunately, like all things that happen, it's a wonderful event here at AirVenture and the fly-in at Oshkosh is that we meet people that are as passionate as we are. Bob Carlton's one of those people. He flies a jet-powered sailplane in the air show. It's called a Super Salto. It has a PBS engine on it, which this airplane has. He's very interested in flying the test program. By the way, this is the fastest airplane he's ever flown. But it was very helpful in getting this program literally off the ground and flying it. So through that rough prototype, we have now honed our pencils and come up with JSX2, which is a completely well, not completely new airplane. It shares all of the same geometry of the original prototype, except it has a much bigger cockpit. It has a lot more capability, totally retractable landing gear, and it's just an absolute hoot. The airplane's performed. Some people have seen it fly at the fly-in here this year, 2014. Boy, I'll tell you what. It's getting fuzzy talking like this. But anyways, this airplane was making flybys at 250 miles an hour, and with a little engine that does about 247 pounds of thrust. The airplane, just like the Monex, weighs just a little over 400 pounds, empty with all of its equipment. It has a range of about 500 miles. So it has a lot of capability for a guy that wants a high-speed toy, which is me. And I always get teary-eyed watching this airplane, and I'm looking to the future of what airplanes we can build next, and this is just one step in that direction. I think we have a lot of things left. Hopefully, in my 71st year, I think that we can still produce airplanes that are exciting, and in a selfish way. We build airplanes. Both Pete and I and Jeremy look at airplanes that we want to have. And it's been very nice to know that other people want to have those same airplanes. I got to dedicate this presentation to my wife Betty, because all of this stuff through the years, we've been through some very good times and some very tough times, but we would have never started this if when I was teaching high school. And trying to build an aviation business, Betty said, what are you going to do? You're working 17, 18 hours a day. They got to decide, are you going to do airplanes, or are you going to teach school? Well, that took me about 5 minutes, but to say, I'd like to build airplanes. And she said, well, let's build airplanes. And that support has never wavered. A blatant plug. This is a book by Jim Cunningham. This probably tells the story a little more accurately than I have tonight, but it talks about building the airplanes from the Sonerai to the Sonex. It's loaded with a lot more pictures, and if you want to learn more about it, it's there. And again, I invite you to see our website. Come to our website. That is SonexAircraft.com. It's really simple. So with that, if there are any questions or anything that we can, Tim?
Fantastic, John. Great presentation. Very rich history. Thank you for sharing that with us. We do have some questions that have come in, and if there's anybody listening right now would like to type a question in, now's the time to do it, to get it on the list there. Let's just go right into the first one. Glenn's just kind of wondering, will there be any twin-engine aircraft in the future?
Oh, I'm sure there will be. I don't know if you're going to see them from Sonex, and I'll leave that up to Jeremy. But twin-engine, here's the deal. If you hadn't noticed in all of our airplanes, so what we're trying to do is keep things simple. If we can keep them simple, easy to build, have high performance for what they are, that's our mantra. It's just the more complication we add to an airplane, the more grief there is. So I think gliders are great. We don't have to worry about engines, etc. Of course I'm involved with the turbine with the jet, but look at how simple a turbine is compared to an engine like any of our reciprocating engines that have thousands of parts rattling around inside trying to tear each other up. It just is, it's just what we really want to do, and we want to keep the economy of flight. Now, I know there's an economy there with the airplanes that we've had. I've flown low-powered, high-performance airplanes all my life, and I've been saving my carbon footprint, and now I'm withdrawing it with the jet.
There you go. So, question here from Mark. Mark's just wondering, so if the Zenus and YX fly so identical, why do a Y-tail?
Why the
Why
Xenos?
the Y-tail? I think he really means the Sonex. If the Sonex and
Sonex and
YX fly so identical,
because the
why do the
white.
Y-tail?
Well, all right. Have you ever seen a bird with a T-tail? Uh, and it's as simple as that. Uh, birds are pretty things, and in the V or Y tail is closer to what nature has done.
It's got good ramp appeal.
Yeah,
Little better looking, sitting in front of the gas pump, huh?
no kidding.
So Dan's wondering, since you've created a number of airplanes with folding wings, why don't you have a folding wing version of the Sonex?
That's a good question. It actually has removable wings, it's a problem of scale. The Onex is small, so to fold the wings up and get it into a garage door that's 7 feet high is not is a challenge. But when you have an airplane that has bigger wing area, that becomes more challenging. The Sonerai airplanes were smaller, again higher stall speeds, so they were capable of having their wings folded back, and that mechanism has incidentally been kind of echoed in some of the current popular designs also, but up from other companies. But we just we'll see.
What is the wing area on the Sonex compared
It's
to
about,
the Sonerai?
the Sonerai was 75 square feet of wing. The Sonex is 98, and Sonerai 2 was something like 84 square feet. But a lot different weights and a lot different mission. Remember, the Sonex was really designed to fly slow. It was designed to meet that 40-mile-an-hour requirement. But, with the proper engine and with some of our stuff like our new turbo-powered airplane, the Turbo Power Aero V, at altitude, we're looking at 175 miles an hour. It's a pretty wide performance spectrum from 40 miles an hour to 175.
Yeah, that's the really cool part is you got both ends covered. You can fly slow and fast.
Yeah, not quite as wide as the jet.
What is the jet stall at?
The jet stalls at about 45 to 50 miles an hour.
Wow. It's because it's so lightweight, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, awesome. Jack has a question here. He says, have you ever looked at offering a YX with an additional Xenos wing so you can have a cruiser on Saturday and a glider on Sunday?
Sounds like a good idea. It just doesn't work in practicality. A long high aspect ratio wing, which is what you want for a motor glider to get the performance, needs a lot of tail volume. If you built all that tail volume into a standard Sonex, it would look kind of funny, and it just would be way too much drag for what it's worth. So that it isn't a real practical solution. There's some airplanes that have been done a half-assed job of that, but it's just not in the cards to do a really good job of a motor glider versus a cruising airplane.
Yeah.
But by the way, the secret to that is altitude. With a turbo-powered Xenos at altitude, and I'm talking about 20,000 feet or so. It has some long legs, and it has some extreme amount of capability that most people don't think about.
That'll be interesting to hear more about the turbo-powered aero conversion. I know Jeremy is going to be talking about that in an upcoming webinar here in a couple months from now.
Correct. It's a neat
question.
Deal. Okay.
Yeah. Question from Dave. He's just wondering, I understand your history with the VW, but why not use a C85 or C65 even?
1930s technology, Dave. It's really simple. There's nothing wrong with those engines, but they're slow turning. We just have to have a different philosophy about using them. They don't have electric start. An 85 might have, but it weighs a ton for what it produces. So we have engines that are superior to those as far as fitting our our form factor of an airplane. And our airplanes are, legitimately small. We know, and that's why we have that big check on the side of our airplane, a reality check. We know that you're gonna fly this. You got 360 days a year, 52 weeks, 52 weekends. How many of those weekends are screwed up like this weekend's going to be with rain or family obligations, holidays, etc. We know that you're going to go out and fly this airplane probably on the average between 20 and 30 hours a year realistically. That's just a statistical fact. And we're trying to keep the cost of aviation low and keep the interest high. We know that you're going to take off from the same airport that you're going to land at. We know you're going to fly probably an hour, and that's on average. Guys are going to take the airplanes on long cross country, sure, once in a while, great. But the reality is that we're going to be wanting to fly these airplanes with reasonable performance, with reasonable gas consumption or fuel consumption, and that's where we're at. So our airplanes are really good single place airplanes. They're utility two-place airplanes, and that's because you're going to be flying by yourself most of the time.
Gotcha. George wonders, do you think you will ever use a Rotax?
I can't say never. There's some things that again, back to my philosophy of taking stuff off of airplanes. We have developed an aero carb that we use on our Jabiru engines, allows us to take 2 fuel pumps away, all the carburetor heat, accoutrements that go with it. And simplify the airplane, run it off of gravity. We have that carburetor running successfully on Rotax engines that are doing aerobatics. But my philosophy is that if you get a reasonable engine at a reasonable price, and that's what we put all of our energy into developing the AeroV. And we're proud to say that we're one of the few companies that has airframes that are designed around engines that we've developed.
Mark's wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the bonded aluminum technique for your wing skins that you talked about, and why did Sonex and Onex use a riveted construction method instead?
We do that because there's a lot of dummies out in the world, and that don't listen to instructions. And bonding aluminum takes attention to detail. It requires adhesives that are no longer available because they had asbestos in them. For the kind of bonding that we were doing. It is a remarkable process, but it is technically harder for the average home builder to maintain the quality, and it's very hard to inspect. And that's why we haven't done it. A pop rivet is pretty foolproof, and that's what we designed our airplanes around. Again, to be built by non-skilled labor in third world countries. So the average American should be able to meet those qualifications.
Just a comment here from Lawrence. He says, I was one of the students at UW Stout in 1977. Thanks.
You're an old guy.
Thanks for one of my most memorable aviation memories. 25 students building an airplane in just a few weeks.
Wow, that's good to hear, and I was always very proud of those guys that they really devoted. They spent a lot of time. I looked at this year. The 1 week wonder was a big deal, and it was a great accomplishment. But when you put it in context of those years back in the 80s, of guys that had never built an airplane before, period. And they just had a few skilled leaders, and they were able to produce those airplanes, and they were very proud of them when they brought them to Oshkosh. They finished up their workshop and brought it right over to Oshkosh, all painted and ready to fly. It was pretty cool.
Very cool. Yeah. Kelly just wonders if you can give a quick tease about what planes you may be considering for future development.
Well, no. I'll let you be teased.
Fair enough. Follow-up question from Kelly. Just wondering if you're going to consider offering a ballistic recovery system airframe parachute in any of the designs.
Well, the jet has it, and the jet is totally is appropriate because the parachute's mounted on a CG, and all of the restraints for it are off of the two main spars. The issue with an airplane like a Sonex or any low-winger airplane is that you have halyards and restraint cables and all this stuff going down the side of the fuselage that have to be tended to. They have to be carefully arranged so they don't take your head off when the thing deploys, because the chute would be behind you. It is a very difficult engineering challenge. And none of the companies have been able to meet it. I just refuse to have all that junk hanging out on the side of the airplane. The point is that Sonex stalls at 40 miles an hour. A ballistic parachute lands you at 35. You make up your mind.
Yeah, I know in the ultralight world, we just, where they developed from, it's a good insurance policy in case you're uncontrollable. Then, I guess it's the last resort insurance policy that has saved people's lives in the case of major structural failure.
Yeah, but again, and I could debate this all night, but again, it's an ultralight aircraft that's built light to be light, and it's not built as a 6G airplane to start with. We're very proud that all of our airplanes are aerobatic. And so, well, I'm not flying aerobatics, but it's nice to have that extra safety deal. When you're flying around in an airliner, you're flying in a 2.5G airplane, and ultralights aren't much better, and most LSAs are only 4G airplanes. So that's a different philosophy. We like to fly our airplanes, and by that I mean we like to ring them out. I always use the term terrorize the neighborhood, but I can't use that anymore. But we like to ring the airplanes. We don't want to be afraid of doing maneuvers. And if you're going to need a parachute, you've done something really stupid.
All right. George is just wondering if you will make a Xenos a quick build kit.
It is a pretty quick build kit now. It isn't to our quick build kits that we have. They can be built. We can do them on our factory. But as far as having a fuselage and wings and all that stuff available, we just haven't had. It doesn't enjoy a huge market, and it's certainly something you can acquire with the factory. I'm in R&D. I don't get involved with sales.
you're in what's your skunk works there? What do you call it?
The hornet's nest.
The hornet's nest. That's right. You're stuck in the hornet's nest.
And by the way, it's the political center of the airport also. So that's our airport manager doesn't like to come in the door.
Okay, so on that note, Jack just made a comment here. He said, I wanted to make sure you tell John, thank you for calling him a dummy, because you usually do call him that anyways.
Okay.
So you got a friend out there in the audience. So, Richard, just wondering, you talked about the electric plane, and he's got a lot of interest in that, and you mentioned battery technology needs to catch up, but you got any estimate of when that's going to be?
Sometime in the future.
Yeah. Okay.
It's definitely not in the past.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's they're getting there, and the whole thrust of what we're doing is to have controllers and motors that eventually will be able to get us to stuff. Can you imagine a little airplane that would look sort of like that jet that's on the screen right now, that has a propeller on it and is electric powered? Wouldn't that be cool?
That'd be awesome.
Mm-hmm.
That would be awesome. So
Hint,
David
hint.
just What's that?
Hint, hint.
Yeah,
Anyway,
hint, hint.
yeah.
So anyways, David is wondering about design process. You know, he's saying design process has changed over the years as more computers have become available and programs to use for design. Do you have any tools like that, new modern tools that you like to use or you would recommend to David?
I'm an early adapter, and what skills I lack, I find people that do have, and people like Pete and our current staff in the R&D department, Jeremy, and our draftsmen, etc. We use AutoCAD, and we use 2D, and we use SolidWorks to develop our stuff. I mean, the jet has been a perfect example of that. And getting our kits to the point where they're matched whole and all that, we have to use that technology. It's still expensive, and it takes some training, and I'm getting older, and I'm a early Mac guy. I still have my Mac I bought in 1984 at home that still works. I don't use it, of course, but it still works. It's cool. And the basic draw programs that started back then and have developed to this fantastic stuff that we can do now that we're with SolidWorks is just and the related programs like SolidWorks that are available to the consumer are great tools. My best training was that I was in art and just the visual training. Our airplanes are a little different looking for many reasons, for aerodynamic reasons, for simplicity reasons, etc. We do a lot of compromises, but I visualize what I want to have, and translating that into a computer is not always the easiest thing.
I know one thing that really impressed me about your Sonex design when it came out was the plans, and I think your plans are just over the top exceptional in the detail and the completeness of them, and I think that's probably a result of the computer technology that exists in AutoCAD to be able to make something like that. So I think that's a real benefit of this new technology is those plans that you got for the Sonex.
It is, but it is interesting, Tim, that all of the production drawings were done by hand, and that art is facing. But actually, Pete did ink drawings of the first as we built the first airplanes. In the first 9 months that we were working, we was building drawings by hand. Of course, at work he uses CATIA and all these other sophisticated programs in the Lockheed system. But of course we transitioned into that. But our plans are as complete as they are because they had to be. That was part of the contract. They were built for production. You can actually, from a set of Sonex plans, you can build every component on the airplane, including the lofting and the cowling and the canopy and all, etc. That's all described and included, and it's bilingual. It's in metrics as well as SAE, and so all of that was taken into consideration, and that resulted in what we're very proud of, an exceptional set of plans to build the airplanes, and of course that's carried on through the other designs. Now, as computer graphics get better, we're going to see a little different philosophy about that. Like with the jet, in that airplane is a highly prefabbed airplane. That we have an EAB version, and we have an exhibition version, which is a much more complete airframe. So that requires less plans. That except for our production drawings.
Sure. One thing that impressed me during your presentation seems like all the planes that you personally were involved in building were just completed very quickly. And how do you do that? How can you complete a plane in 9 months or 6 months like you did with many of these?
Well, it's just to just get out and do something. It's just it's very simple. Like Sonerai I took me 9 months. I was granted work as school teacher, but most of it was done in the winter. It was done in after hours dinner. I'd come home, go out to the garage, and work till midnight. That was pretty simple, and get up at 6 in the morning and go teach school. I'm sure that my students were robbed of a fine education, but it didn't matter to me. I was happy. The but the point is that when you go out to the shop, you got to finish something. That's the whole secret. I mean, you don't leave it till tomorrow. I got to put a couple more rivets, or I'll finish filing this tomorrow. You finish that, and then you can put it down and say it's done. And it's just one small bite at a time, and you can build it very quickly. Incidentally, I forgot to point out that in the Sonerai I, that back in the day, that had a brand new engine in it, and it was all the tubing and fabric and everything I spent on that airplane was $1,200.
Wow.
Yeah, put it in perspective with today.
Well, but today Sonexes can be built for very inexpensively.
Yeah, 25,000 or easily, and that's a big leap. But when we look at what we were getting, as a school teacher making $6,000 a year, so it's a different world than it is. But it's no less fun.
Right, exactly. Reaching the end here of our questions here, we got one from Richard, and he's asking, any thoughts on a high wing Sonex?
Yeah, there's thoughts about that. I mean, Jeremy's been pushing for that for a while, and that may be something in the future. I'm going to say it's in the near future. I'm going to put my foot in my mouth if I go any further. But the point is that we have low wing, and I've flown mid wing airplanes. I've flown a lot of high wing Cessnas, etc. And they're kind of boring. A lot of guys just want to go fly around, but we want to fly around in circles and loops and rolls. And I got cross country flying out of my veins a long time ago. I enjoy going up and flying for an hour at a time and wringing an airplane out and really having fun flying the airplane, looking out the window. In today's airplanes now, we've gotten so sophisticated, and like I got to admit it, the jet has a touch screen deal and all that, but it still has a window. And we really don't need it. We don't have an autopilot in it. It's meant to be flown. And not that you can't do that with a high winger, but it has a different mission, I think, for a lot of people. The visibility's better. Well, that's bull. It's easier to get into, I suppose. And I'm getting old, and maybe I should be thinking about that. But I really personally have a hard time with coming to grips with doing a high wing, but I think it would only be done if it was good. And you know what it'd look like? It'd end up looking something like a tailwind, which I still think is a brilliant design. It's a box. It's a box with a round cowling on it, and it goes like stink. But again, it's not aerobatic, so it doesn't fulfill my requirements.
Well, that's fantastic. We did reach the end of our questions here, John. Thank you so much for being with us tonight and sharing your experiences over the years with the different aircraft that you've designed. It is personally really interesting for me. I really appreciate it. Is there any last comments you would want to leave with the audience?
No, and again, thank you, Tim. But I got to thank the EA and the Heritage of Paul and everybody here that works so hard to bring AirVenture. We moved to Oshkosh in 1981, and we have a lot of friends here. And this is the heart of aviation. I hate that winter's coming on, but that gives us the time to get in the shop and work on more projects. But the EA is an essential part of allowing us to do things. It's inspired me since it started. I became an EA member because I met a guy at random at a wedding reception once, and I was talking about airplanes, and his name was Lucino. He's one of the early members of EAA, and one day I got in the mail, I got a membership, and that just blew me away, and I've been a member ever since then, and it's just we can't say enough about the efforts that the EAA puts forward to keep our dreams alive.
Wow, fantastic. Well, I know from the staff perspective, being on the staff here, it's a joy to be a part of this. Aviation is my personal passion, so I'm delighted to come into work every day and to be a part of helping members connect with each other. My thought is that EAA is all about helping members connect with each other to share information so we can fulfill our dreams and our passions and build things, and that's what the webinars do. Every Wednesday we sit down, and you're with us this Wednesday, but we try and bring a member, a volunteer, and share their information with, tonight we had over 150 people logged in, and this is what EAA does. They try and connect members to members. So I'm so delighted to be a part of that myself. So thank you for those comments, John.
Okay, and thanks to all of you for tuning in.
Thank you, folks. Have a great night, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. See you next week.